I'm very excited to present Pablo Majano and Catherine Clark. They're going to be presenting Redefining Resiliency for Communities Large and Small. Pablo is a senior community planner at Michigan Economic Development Corporation. He works with the Redevelopment Ready Communities, RCC team to provide technical assistance support around planning and economic development tools to communities all across the state of Michigan. He received his bachelor's in urban planning at Michigan State University, received a bachelor's in urban planning master's in public administration at Central Michigan University. But prior to this, working at MEDC, served as a vacant property coordinator, historic preservation officer, and a planner for the city of East Lansing. Catherine is an urban designer at SmithGroup. She has a passion for inclusive engagement and equitable design. She's worked with a range of projects from citywide comprehensive community plans to park corridors and even site scales that she's worked at. A passion both for rigorous analysis and high quality design, which I can really get behind, Catherine. It's fantastic quality to have. And believes implementation-based solutions and community-based storytelling is vital to creating plans that truly reflect the needs and wants of community members. And it's kind of why we're here today, is to tell the story about the development of this toolkit. So without further ado, Pablo, I think you're going to take control, yeah?
Yes. I'll take care of this screen here. Share screen. All right, screen good?
Looks great.
Great.
Awesome. Sure, I can move back and forth. There we go. Hopefully it's not on a timer. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I am a senior community planner at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and a little introduction to someone who is core over here at the MEDC to implementing the Resiliency Toolkit that we're gonna talk about today is Michelle Parkman, who is the Managing Director of Technical Assistance, and then I'll let Catherine Clark introduce her team.
Yeah, so my name is Catherine. We are very fortunate to have an incredible team of really diverse thinkers in the design space, from traditional sustainability and climate adaptation to the housing market and economists. And so we have pictured here Kathleen, Katrina, Alicia, myself, Rachel, Jenny, and Kat, all of whom were really instrumental in not only the development of the toolkit, but also in us implementing this in communities going forward.
Great. So before even getting into the toolkit, a little explanation of what the MEDC is, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. We are a quasi-judicial governmental agency. So quasi-governmental agency, which means we have both civil service and we have corporate employees. Always when going around and doing this presentation, we always ask, what is economic development, right? And there's not really always one answer to that, but in general, its focus is on concepts like improving the quality of life, access to good jobs, and private investment. So how does Michigan address economic development as a state? So the MEDC is really a partnership between 40 plus local economic development organizations to collaborate at the state level, collectively help create prosperity throughout the state. MEDC works with numerous local, state, and federal partners to help leverage existing tools while also administering several MEDC specific programs. So really the strategic focus at MEDC is attracting, retaining, and growing businesses, developing attracting places, and supporting small businesses. So the RC program, which we're going to talk about today, really falls under that developing, attracting places umbrella. So RC, along with other teams, were located under economic development incentives and services. So we focus primarily on that traditional downtown revitalization, but we can also expand into walkable corridors as well. So mentioning on those several teams that we have within economic development incentives and services, which it can also be known as EDIS. I like to use a lot of acronyms, so I apologize if I get into some of the acronyms, and just put it in the chat and I'll try to get to it if I see it a little later and tell you what that means. But we have the State Historic Preservation Office, which we usually call SHPO. We have the MACC, the Michigan Arts Cultural Council. We have the Michigan Main Street team and the Redevelopment Services team. So the RRC program, we work in close partnership also with our regional prosperity team. And that regional prosperity team focuses on real estate development, gap financing deals, and also the business development team is housed within there. But before getting into a little bit of the RRC, a program that really focuses more on that traditional downtown is our Michigan Main Street program. So they provide technical assistance for communities desiring to develop their own local Main Street program by utilizing the Main Street approach, a common sense approach to tackling the complex issues of revitalizing by capitalizing on downtown's history and identifying the unique assets of the communities itself. But today we're gonna focus more on redevelopment ready communities and the toolkit and how we got there. So now you're wondering RRC, all this talk around RRC. I know not everyone here is from the state of Michigan, which is great to get this information out. But RRC is a voluntary technical assistance program available to any community throughout Michigan. RRC helps communities build a strong foundation for community-driven economic development through planning, zoning, training, marketing, and more. So really think of RRC as a roadmap and a toolkit for success. And ultimately, RRC aims to position communities for development. Oops, sorry, we went along too fast. Back. So really, it's a self-help program. Well, so while the RRC team can develop endless guidance, we do not have the capacity to directly update communities' plans, zoning, ordinances, or other things. That will happen either in-house or outside help. So however, the RRC team, we can help with some capacity on like smaller projects, like training strategies or public participation. So we like to let communities know that the program is not really a cookie cutter. The team, it's 5 of us, work over 310 communities. And what makes sense for one community doesn't really translate for another. So RRC recognizes that and we embrace that concept, but it also does increase the importance of an open communication so RRC can understand the local challenges that a community has, understand the intent of the best practices that we evaluate communities against, and the options of designations, which I'll talk about here in the next slide. It's important to know that RRC also cannot address all the challenges that happen in the communities. RRC can help with some of the challenges around planning, zoning, and economic development, but those often help address other challenges. But we're not the golden key. We're not coming in and we're not going to fix all the issues within the community. So that 2-path designation that I told you about, there's an essentials pathway, and then there is also a certified pathway. So in the redevelopment ready communities, we have a set of 6 best practices. So if you go through the essentials pathway, you're only going through best practices 1 through 4 with less expectations that you see on the green. And then if you're going the certified pathway, you go through the full 6 best practices and you see that on the blue with all those expectations. So the more why we did this is to address more of the communities that don't have the capacity or the resources to accomplish. It could be a very daunting task. It is a very collaborative effort. So those who don't have all the resources or the capacity to do the work, essentials designation is definitely a path that a community can take. Or if you're ready and you want to get to that certified path, you can go that route too. And then we give you more of the tools and access to that redevelopment services team, which I'll explain on the next slide over here. So really the benefits of why would a community even go through this, through all the expectations. It's really, you know, a third-party planning review of your process. So we talk about transparency, predictability, efficiency throughout your process, your planning processes, your planning documents. So looking at all the information that you have, we provide a set of recommendations based on the best practices and how you can meet those. We have the tools and the resources. Like we said, we work with 300 plus communities throughout the state of Michigan to tell you how a best practice can be done, but we always say R&D, rip off and duplicate, but also it has to make sense for your community. So if you're doing something in, let's say, the city of Detroit, and you want to maybe copy, oh, this looks good in Detroit, let's try to do this in the city of Grand Rapids. We say, yeah, totally, use some of that foundation, use that framework, but also make it fit for your community, because city of Detroit is not city of Grand Rapids. We do provide technical assistance to communities. So we provide match funding to assist communities in implementing their vision and developing their plans in reaching the essentials or certified designation. So common projects for that include a master plan update, zoning updates, marketing strategies. Certified level communities continue to have that support during the maintenance phase as well. The RC team also provides tailored hands-on technical support to help you achieve the missing criteria. So like I mentioned earlier, if there's something smaller like around training strategies or recruitment documents that we can help you develop, we'll also get in and see how we can our team can best assist you. And then upon certification, once you do get certified, or you also sorry, it's a little different, but when you get certified, you have access to the redevelopment services team. The redevelopment services team can come in, help you identify sites, transition those sites, develop property information packages for you, put your sites online. Really, the whole goal is to try to turn those properties that maybe aren't really giving you, aren't really on your tax roll, and putting those properties back on the tax roll. So turning your vacant properties into unique properties that are, developing that sense of place in your community, creating those vibrant places in your traditional downtown mixed areas. So now after that introduction on RRC, why build the Resiliency Toolkit now? So more or less, Michelle and I were talking, and you typically have our one-on-ones every month, just seeing what's up, what's going on with the communities. And we had a conversation like, what do we do? What are the communities doing? We hear that the city of Sheboygan is trying to do A, B, and C. And then the city of Grand Rapids, which is a bigger community, is trying to do, all the things to try to help their communities. And then you have a community of probably like 600, like the village of Bear Lake, who don't really know what they're doing and don't know, not necessarily saying they don't know what they're doing, but they don't know who to reach out to, or what resources are available for them to help their communities that are struggling during this pandemic. So we thought, okay, well, there is a lot of, state programs, a lot of resources that are going out right now trying to help these communities, but how can we get together? How can we hone in all the resources so a community can come in and maybe do an assessment of where they stand, and we can organize it so it's not very daunting on how you can get started on your resiliency journey. So it makes it more realistic. So sometimes you can see, in order for us to be resilient, we have to do all these different things, but how can we manage that? How is that even realistic? The whole aim for the toolkit is to prioritize all that information, organize it in a way that it's achievable, and it's developed into like strategies that are short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And that's the important part, where it really focuses on something that everyone can do. So a community as small as 600 to a community over 50,000, there's anything can be worked on when using this toolkit. So commonly things that we always hear, we don't have the funding to work on this right now. There's communities all across Michigan that the city manager is either the planning zoning person, they're also the city clerk, and they're also the enforcement officer. So they're wearing a lot of hats. They don't have the extra staff dedicated to this, or how do we even start? So the whole aim is trying to get all that information together for these communities. But really, how could we start without trying to define what resiliency means to the state of Michigan? So we know that resiliency can mean so many different things to so many different people. So our partners at SmithGroup took a really hard look in how we can really define resiliency overall for the state of Michigan. We know with a lot of recent events that happen in Michigan that the definition needs to be focused on the needs of our communities. So we will get into a little bit more of that definition as we go through the slides. I'm not gonna really get into that here, but that was step one, defining resiliency. Step two was conducting that research. And again, without the help of the Smith Group, none of this would have been possible, but they did such an awesome job of seeing what is Michigan doing right now. And mostly what you will see is the bigger communities, such as like Ann Arbor or City of Detroit, or you got the Royal Oaks, you got the City of Grand Rapids, that are doing the stuff because they have the resources and the capacity to do so. So they took all this research, put it all together, and then we developed a toolkit, which eventually we connected with experts. And that was step 3 in the process. So we had focus groups around 4 main themes, which I will get into, but all the focus groups of public, private, nonprofit, academic leaders, discussions that help deep dive into early findings and were used to highlight existing policy mechanisms and programs that exist across sectors and geographies. So a critical component of these focus groups was identifying the best intention behind the M&EC resilience framework and how economic development could be connected to the resiliency efforts for the communities. So some of the takeaways from those focus groups, it's really truly has to be a collaborative approach. And that's key here. It's an all hands on deck situation. So really one big takeaway is if a community is going to work on something, let's make sure we're not duplicating efforts. Let's involve everyone on the same page, even if we're working on something regionally, so it all makes sense. So the county and the city aren't doing the same thing and duplicating those efforts. That's really key, that early on that they needed to make sure we knew. Also, these are the 4 themes that we came up with once we have developed the Resiliency Toolkit. So place, people, infrastructure, and economy. So we understand a little bit of the broadness on these categories, but in general, it does go along with the overall vision for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation when we're trying to provide technical assistance to the communities. And then big here is the emphasis on your proactive action. So the days of waiting for something to happen and then being taken care of needs to be behind us. And I think when we were developing this toolkit and working with SmithGroup, we realized that Michigan needs to be at the forefront of really, implementing resiliency into their communities and just getting ready for, future events that could happen. I was just sitting at a conference yesterday where it talked about, climate immigration, how Michigan, is going to be literally one of the coolest places you can be at, no pun intended, but everywhere else down south is going to just be so hot. I think I read somewhere like 1 out of 20 days that someone's going to be able to just be out there in the heat. So are we ready for that? Are we ready for that climate adaptation to immigration to come to the state of Michigan? I don't think so, not yet, but we will be. So in RRC, Redevelopment Ready Communities, we're actively always telling communities to be proactive with their plans. So one of the things, like when you're developing your master plan, you're developing your economic development strategies or any other type of plan, actually. So it's not just something that's sitting on your shelf. We're telling communities, create goals, create responsibilities, create timelines. So then at the end of the year, you can evaluate, you can measure where things stand. So this is what we hope the toolkit is intended on, developing some of that action plan so communities can start building that resiliency into their plans. So there always needs to be actionable steps on how to get there. And the resources, like I explained earlier, so many resources. It was really, and you'll see this throughout the toolkit, and I think Catherine, or maybe we'll get into a little bit of how that looks like, but there's so many available tools and communities could feel really overwhelmed. Again, we talk about like the capacity, right? Like small communities to big communities. I want to do this, this, and this, but do I have the resources to do that? Once you get into this toolkit, you build out your assessment, it really helps you focus on, we need to do this first because this is more manageable, this is achievable, this is realistic. And that's where the RC Resiliency Toolkit was born. So really, it's accessible toolkit for any community to use, big and small. It's constantly being updated. So if you go in there, there may be a link that's not working right now, but we're going quarterly updates, trying to make sure there's any up-to-date information that we can provide for communities. It's everything that's on there is vetted, and it's just really getting the ball rolling when we're thinking about resiliency and how communities approach that, and how we as a state can do better for our communities to, get the ball rolling. And then with that, I will give it to Catherine, and you let me know when to pass the slides.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Pablo. Hi again, everybody. My name is Catherine Clark with SmithGroup. And as Pablo said earlier, when it came down to creating this toolkit, the very first thing that we had to do was to find a common ground in terms of what do we mean when we talk about resiliency. And so as you'll see on the next slide, we were really inspired by this statement from NIST, which says that community resilience is the ability to prepare for anticipated hazards, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. And what this is really talking about is the shocks and stressors that our communities are under right now. Shocks being kind of those major once in a lifetime events or once in a while events, versus stresses being those persistent challenges that communities continue to face. And when I look at the chat, we have all of these diverse people on the call with such different skills. We have people who are working as writers in the social sphere to amplify voices. We have people here who work in housing finance or who work in offshore energy. All of these skills are needed to address the different shocks and stressors that communities are facing right now. And so to kind of give you a better picture of what that process looks like, on the next slide, you'll see essentially the more that a community prepares, the better and the quicker they are able to respond, which helps with their recovery as well. You're able to be more deliberate in your recovery, and it gives you time and space to adapt. And kind of if you look on the next slide, you'll see it's really that time that you take to prepare that can change the outcome of a community going forward for the next time, because we can't stop shocks and stressors from happening completely. There are some that are preventable, but there are others that are out of control. And so there is that need for that forethought. And the more that you prepare, the more time that you have to adapt and to create these really strong systems and networks within your group of people, within your infrastructure, to be able to handle the next event as it comes to you. And so the way that we broke out the toolkit was into those 4 pillars that Pablo kind of touched on and hinted at earlier. We know that there are so many different ways that communities can prepare and adapt. And so we took it and we thought about it in kind of these 4 different pillars that are needed to create a strong, resilient foundation for a community. One being place. This is a little bit more of the traditional way that communities tend to think about resiliency. We have people. This is thinking more socially. Really being inspired by all of the conversations that were coming out of the pandemic and the rise once again of the social justice movement. Also looking at infrastructure. This is really key, especially when we're talking about regional and a city impact on their communities, and what public staff can really take some leaps and bounds on. And then of course your economy as well. The pandemic really highlighted this, and while this was just a fraction of what immediacy really takes on, it's also a really key part that we wanted to keep in mind. So to kind of help visualize what these different systems look and feel like in your communities, on the next slide, you'll see when we're talking about places, land use could be anything. It could be how close your homes are to your schools or to your retail, whether or not those retailers then are able to be supported by your residents. It's talking about buildings and structures that are to code, that are using innovative technology when possible. And also your natural systems. How are we supporting our ecology instead of disrupting it with our built form? And then when it comes to resilient people, you of course have not only your housing where people live, you also have their health and well-being, what not only is their proximity to hospitals, but what supports a healthy lifestyle. How are people able to get their food? How are people able to move throughout their space? What is their perception of their safety? And also, how are they being included in the conversation? Are there spaces where people feel safe, where people can meet? Are there equitable systems in place for people to have access to housing even? All of that kind of falls under resilient people when we're talking about that. And then when we go into infrastructure, you get this added layer of all of these different built systems. It's your communications, how you are able to be in contact with people, especially in this digital age, your transportation and having a variety of options on how to get places, the types of energy resources that our cities are using. This is such a hugely evolving space as we're seeing. Also, your waste system, sometimes even the smallest changes there can have a huge impact on how much carbon communities are putting out and what their offsets really look like. And then, of course, also your water systems. I mean, this is big for us in Michigan, of course, being right there with the Great Lakes, but it's huge for everybody in terms of how we're able to access fresh water if you live out west versus being able to maintain healthy water bodies when you're around here in the Midwest or along the coast. And then we kind of round that out with your economy. So looking at how we are able to support your workers, how you are able to support entrepreneurs in the event of, let's say, a major corporation leaving your community. Are you going to be able to withstand that? Or let's say a pandemic really impacting your service industry, and how do you support them in the face of some of these different events? And who do you partner with to be able to make all of that happen is also really key. And so when you put all of this together, you're able to see that it can't just be one. Communities really do have to take on this multi-pronged approach. And we understand that that can be really daunting, but to us, that was why we created the toolkit as kind of this accessible way for people to step in at any point in their resiliency journey with a host of vetted resources and the best, brightest in terms of best practices from all of those resources that Pablo mentioned earlier. So as you'll kind of see going forward, I know we are a little bit short on time, but I'll try and breeze through a little bit of how we've really applied this process in a couple of different communities. And so to start off with it, in the toolkit, you'll see there is kind of this process that we take people through, and you can join it at any point in your resiliency journey. Your community could already have a climate action plan and a housing action plan, or your community could just be starting, or you could, let's say, be a landscape architect or a civil engineer trying to figure out how to enhance resiliency on your specific project. This still kind of applies. And so first, we provide a self-evaluation in the toolkit for people to be able to take, which essentially helps you, your client, your community, interested partners, nonprofits, people who are working in this space to see what are they already doing. Because oftentimes what we see is that usually people are already working in these spaces and others just don't know. And so being able to have that common understanding is really key. Next, you'll see we talk all about assessment. So kind of looking through all of that information that your stakeholders have given you, along with what the data is showing, what the trends are showing, and using that as your benchmark. From there, you can really prioritize, look at what is the budget, what are the funding tools out there. Pablo, I think if you hit the button one more time, it'll pop up. There we go. But to be able to see what of your opportunities could really be implemented. And then finally recommending it based off of this prioritization, saying, okay, we've looked at the trends, we know what will have the most impact, we know what we can go after versus what we're going to chip away at. These are the overall objectives and actions that we're going to take on and who we're going to partner with and how. And then finally, being able to build that awareness and implement it. And to round it out, right, you'll notice kind of that bottom hole right there. you need to have data and metrics. It's important to recognize that resiliency is not one size fits all, and it doesn't exist at one time. It needs to evolve as conditions change. And so being able to measure your impact over time is really key to tracking your progress. And so we have been working with MEDC, doing some really exciting work. We think being able to apply the toolkit in a couple of different communities all throughout Michigan, from cities such as Ferndale, which is a suburban kind of a city just outside, I should say, of Detroit, versus Marquette, all the way up in the UP, and Midland, which is in the center of the hand, if you know what I'm talking about, kind of in the towards the middle of Michigan. And so these different communities, while they are all over and most certainly have their own incredible opportunities as well as their own challenges, also have some common threads to them that you'll see throughout. And so when we partnered with them, we thought it was really incredible timing because all of these communities were going through their master plans, which for anybody who works in the urban design or planning space, you'll know that a master plan essentially sets the direction for a community going forward. And it's a time to be able to check in with the community about what they want for that vision to be. And so it's a great time to not only educate them on resiliency, but also to ask what they think that looks like. And it can be on a really granular level. I mean, if you look at the middle social media poll, we're looking at resiliency, although it might not seem like it. We're asking which types of new housing developments are really important to a community, and what that's going to help us figure out is what are the different types of housing that we can have to support a variety of people throughout their lifetime, right? And that's resiliency, that's within people and the people pillar, but there are also different types. And so you're able to kind of have these checkpoints and great conversations, which really lead to awesome results. And so as you'll see kind of going on next, when we were chatting with each community, they do have their own unique challenges, most definitely. I mean, Marquette is so far up north that supply chain issues are really important, which is not necessarily something that Ferndale is thinking about. They have great proximity to really wonderful resources that are able to access them easily. But there are also certain challenges that are existing across all of them. So you'll see right here, housing is something that was brought up in each and every community that we talked with. However, what they were trying to resolve in terms of housing was still very different. In Marquette, they have a very burgeoning tourism industry that is very popular up there, with people trying to take short-term rentals, and that impacts your housing market versus in places like Ferndale, where they already have a pretty built out community, and they're trying to figure out how do we make space for people who we know are moving in when there isn't necessarily so much space that we see to begin with, and being able to find those opportunities in between. And it's important to note that when we're looking at all of those different challenges, there are also incredible assets with each of them that you'll want to be sure that you're highlighting and leveraging moving forward. Kind of on the next slide, you'll be able to see, and it can take on a couple of different forms too. And so when we're applying the toolkit, it can look different depending on your industry, right? It could be something like this, which is a very traditional plan where you have your goals, the actions, you have a set kind of timeline that you're trying to achieve those in. You have responsible parties that you're partnering with. Or it could look like something that is a little bit more interactive. Right here, we were working with a community trying to show what resiliency looks like holistically for them. And so we took a diagram of their community center and looked at the different types of implementation objectives that we were trying to give them, such as being able to include stormwater management and safe road crossings, and how when you combine those, it creates a holistic community. Or it could be even one very specific tool. On the next slide, you see we're helping a community figure out how to promote gray water reuse, and a program that they had at the community level, being able to show communities how that impacts them using resources that we were able to collect from the toolkit, and a recommendation from the toolkit, which said that this could be an opportunity area. So there are so many diverse ways to really implement it based on your needs and your community or your clients' needs as well. But a major thing to kind of keep in mind with all of that is prioritization. A major thing we like to say is we try and keep expectations realistic, which can be really hard because we work in a fantastic, incredible industry where we're able to be opportunists. We find all of these incredible opportunities for communities, and we need to remember, how do we decide what needs the attention most? Because there's only so much staff and there's only so much funding. And how do we really push out the word on that once we decide what those major priorities are? And so we use kind of these 5 metrics of what are the resources that you have to achieve this? Is there awareness, or can you promote awareness on this topic? Is it going to have a major impact in the long run or in the short term? In terms of feasibility, do you have the political backing, the political will? Do you have the financing for it? And also, who are your partners who's already working in this space? And if nobody is, then can you? So going kind of forward, I know that there was somebody who had asked about training to use the toolkit. So we'll give you a crash course right now. If you go onto Immediacy's website, you'll be able to find the toolkit. It is free for anybody to use. And when you download it, right up at the front, it gives you a sample self-assessment that you can take and make for your community, for your team, to be able to measure where you are now. Next up, you will see within each chapter, under each section, there'll be the shocks and stressors that you all are potentially facing, ones that you might already be thinking about, and maybe ones that you haven't yet, but that you could consider kind of going forward in your process. And from there, you are able to see under each shock and stressor, we have actions that you can take if this is something that you are facing. And they range anything from a high level, broad range policy to specific types of projects that you could pursue on the site level. And then going forward, the metrics and resources for you to be able to collect data if you don't have any yet. All of these are free, public for you to use. They're linked in there. All you have to do is click on them. A lot of them are from those national resources that we were looking at earlier from Pablo. And those are what you'll be able to use not only to develop and build on those actions, but also to measure them in the long run and to see what your impact is. So if you are interested in using the toolkit, we highly recommend visiting the Resiliency portal. And I think at that, we'll try and leave just enough time for a few questions.
Yep. You'll see that the toolkit when you get on there, and we divide up a lot of the best practices. So in comparison to like RRC, there's a lot of short-term strategies right now. And then we'll be building out some case studies as we move forward with the toolkit and get more communities involved. Like Catherine was mentioned, we have Marquette and Midland. We're going to do another round, involve some more communities later down the fall. And it's going to be incorporated into this, and data is going to be uploaded. But one thing that I wanted to echo is really, and I tell this to all the communities, if you want to get your communities involved, look at their master plans, look at the economic development strategies, even housing plans or parks and recreation plans. Join an open seat in your committee. So city council, planning commission, task force, just think of ways to advocate for your community and resiliency in your own profession. And just keep educating yourself in this topic, because I think it's not only important for Michigan, but it's important for us as a whole, as a nation.
Thank you so much, Catherine, Pablo. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions in the chat, and but I wanted to take the liberty at asking just the first question. Something I've been thinking about. This is not a linear toolkit, right? You can insert your community, your planning at any point into it. And so I'm thinking about low or high hanging fruit for communities. What have you seen? What has less progressive communities done or used from that toolkit to begin this resilience journey that you've been describing? Do you have any examples? I know you're looking for case studies, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on what a community could easily do to begin that journey.
We'll take that, Catherine.
Yeah, I can go on ahead and take a first stab at it, and then you can join in if that sounds good. All right, then. I know that this is probably not the answer that you want, but it really does depend on the community, and the political will there, I would say, goes a long way, as well as your nonprofit partnerships are really key and not to be underestimated, because even in certain cities where, let's say, as you had pointed out, they're less progressive, maybe when it comes to the environmental side of things or to the housing side of things, oftentimes there is still a regional entity or a nonprofit who's working in that space, who would just need to know like what the opportunities are and what the tools are at their disposal for them to be able to run with it too. So the biggest thing is to identify your champions overall, and it also depends on what your major goal is, right? And what the most pressing challenge is for your community. If the biggest thing is that population is decreasing because you have a thriving college where students aren't staying because they don't see very many economic opportunities in the area, or maybe they don't see like a thriving nightlife that they would like to be in, then that tells you, okay, we need to focus on partnerships with major industries what are partner that match both the technical skills of these students and the needs of our community. Or how can we make a downtown that is able to meet the wants of our legacy residents who have lived here and moved here because they loved a quiet suburban town, while also being able to support youth who are looking for more full service restaurants and things like that. So being able to narrow down your big want, your big ask, your big champion going forward is really the key to knowing what your win will be going through this process.
Yeah, I think, and I guess adding to that a little bit, and really key on our like website when we talk about like immediate strategies, things that you can already do. You see a lot of momentum when you get those small wins on, resiliency, because like it could vary. Like we're from really large projects to small projects. So like even just updating your website and having all your documents on there, including links and resources for your small businesses, right? Updating your capital improvements plan, ensuring all your department heads are in the process so everyone's on the same page, or even collecting names and getting a database together for resources for everybody. These are small things that communities can already do and have been doing in order to just start that process on resiliency.
The communication part is really key too, and I will tag on with that one. Not only is it meeting with all different people and getting the word out, it's also making sure that it's in a way that community members can understand. So if you, let's say, have a group that doesn't speak English as the first language, making sure that you have those resources translated for them to be able to be part of that process is key. Or if literacy isn't very high in a specific neighborhood, being able to do things like videos and seminars and other ways for them to be able to learn and interact with information is also really helpful and impactful in communities.
And so collaboration is key, communication is key, to be able to really insert any of these types of plans and bring them to fruition is what I'm understanding. Fantastic.
That was a good summary right there.
Okay, so now we do have a few questions from the audience, and I'm just going to kind of sort through them. Sorry if they're not in time order, but I'm just going to go through them, and then I'll let you, Catherine, or Pablo decide who can take them. So, did you utilize NOAA's Steps to Resilience Toolkit and its corresponding toolkit for incorporating equity?
I'll let the builders, the true builders of the toolkit, answer that one.
I believe we did. We used quite a few different toolkits, quite frankly, including things like from disciplines. So like the American Institute of Architects Guide to Equity and Resiliency and Sustainability, 3 separate documents all kind of got included and pulled from. We even pulled from specific communities such as, Cedar Rapids, Ohio, or looking at communities out west in California, and trying to keep it diverse and really broad in terms of the approach, so that way we were getting the absolute best and brightest from all of them. And what's really amazing is that immediacy, and we are working to continuously update the toolkit on a quarterly basis. So as more and more resources come out, we're keeping as much as we can a pulse on them, so that way we can keep updating it and incorporating new information and new resources for people.
I would say we got to a point where we were building out the toolkit, and then we have so many resources that we wanted to continue to add on that we would have kept adding on and not put the toolkit out. So we had to at one point just say, hey, let's just put this out and use this as a live document. So it's online. As we get resources, we'll continually update that. So that's the key goal now moving forward, is just updating that document as much as possible with up-to-date resources.
And having it vetted and having that expert input on that initial toolkit probably help spur that and get it published. And okay. How effective has this redefinition of resilience helped in adaptation planning at the community level, given your experiences?
Do you want to take that one first, Pablo, and then I'll hop in? And all right.
You go ahead.
I would say it's been really helpful, and the sooner that you can get people in the mindset of thinking about resiliency in a holistic way, the better the results are in terms of the conversations that you have and the awareness that you're able to build. That was really instrumental, because joining all three of those communities during their master planning process for cities, that's usually one of the biggest pushes, where they are very forward facing, where they're having really in-depth and really incredible conversations with community members, whether that be online or in person, and being able to make those connections for people and being able to raise the awareness of, yes, we understand that housing is really important, but also you're in a flood zone. Like, what are you going to do to address that? Because that will affect you not only in housing, but also in your economy. It will affect your ability to fund certain endeavors later on if you're having to instead redirect millions of dollars to being able to support your infrastructure when a dam collapses, or things like that. And so being able to have those well-rounded conversations also helps community members, clients, ourselves as designers reprioritize and understand whether or not we are actually answering the right question and being open to pivots, which I think has been really, really helpful throughout the process. Pablo, I don't know if there's anything else that stands out to you.
No, and I just think a lot of times when we're talking with communities, we use examples that have happened to Michigan, right? We have PFAS that's all around. We have the Midland Dam that crashed. We have natural disaster. We have a tornado that hit, Gaylord, and their ability to recover, and they're still recovering from that tornado that happened down there. Or we have giant sinkholes. We have our infrastructure. We have a lot of holes in our streets, and broadband and infrastructure and all these things. We, try to emphasize on those real things, like we need to take care of these things now. So we're not waiting for something else to come happen, and then we're struggling to help our communities, our citizens here, to get what they need, the resources, in order to get back to where they were. So like leaning back to like that graphic that Catherine showed, and the ability to respond to something, I think it's really key to use those real life examples for these communities, translate that to them, saying, hey, we need to be able to bounce back. We need to be able to give you the resources. You need to be prepared as a community. Just because it's not here, just because you don't see it, doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And you've seen that a lot of what's happening in our communities, including, like the Flint water crisis and our lead pipes. And we still have like a lot of lead pipes in our state.
Do you have materials in Spanish or any other languages?
No, not yet, not at this moment, but that is a very good idea. But I'm also bilingual, so if anyone wants to come and talk to me, I can translate any of the stuff for you in Spanish and have that good conversation.
Another reason to call
yeah.
Pablo up for. Yeah, he'll help you out. This is an interesting question. I always love these. How are you involving the arts as a resilience collaborator?
Absolutely, a huge part. um, not only in the social sphere, but also as key storytellers, as a lot of times some of your biggest activists and your advocates at a local level, the arts are really major. So when you look in the people section, actually, you'll see several different references to the arts. And in every community, pretty much, we've been able to involve either arts communities, community foundations, sometimes libraries or garden societies. Um, People who are already really active in these spaces are also usually some of the people who have the most insights because they're on the ground and are able to both tell you other people's stories, but also convey things back. And so being able to help out with that education component, having advocates in the arts has been really key as one of the major opportunities that we've really loved being able to see and play.
Great, fantastic. I'm going to actually ask my colleague, Justine, do we have time for one more question or should we get to the wrap up because we are coming up on the hour?
You ask it right now. We can have one more.
One more? Okay. Thank you. Here is one more question for y'all about applying the toolkit. Do you see the process happening in different directions? I remember there was the circle of arrows. So building awareness, for instance, might be helpful to garner support early on in that process. So maybe that gets the linearity of that or the non-linearity of it. So I think that the question is, in that process of design of a resilience toolkit or a resilience plan, one of the elements in there was building awareness, and I think the question is, can that be inserted anywhere in that process, or are they all designed to follow each other to build a more robust plan?
I think key to that toolkit, right, in getting out there and letting people know that this resource exists, it is going to be pretty key. And as Catherine and I, are going around and presenting to groups like you, right, and learning more about this toolkit, wherever you are out in the process, you can be near the end. You can have like a fully baked potato on a resiliency project that you have. You can still get into this toolkit and find like the resources that you need in order to make that whatever you've developed into a reality.
And I think also on the community scale, I believe that you're referring to kind of our circle diagram of the process that people go through, kind of talking all about when you start off with your kind of readiness, right? You're going through a self-evaluation, and to us, we've realized as community designers, we've also been able to do this at the community level and make it a public process all the way throughout. When you're assessing information, being able to take that back to the community and saying, this is what we saw, and being able to check back with them, like, is that your understanding too? Did anything surprise you? Is anything like different from your lived experience? And if so, what? And so kind of having those constant barometers of having people be able to check your work is really an important part of being authentic in your resiliency journey as well.